need a microphone. Yeah, I mean, Terry McAllister, I've no particular special standing in this debate, except I'm a concerned member of the community. I mean, I suppose my overall feeling is one of that this was about keeping Cambridge special. I think that's not the right place to start. I think we need to, the starting point for me would be how to make Cambridge special. I think the reality is Cambridge has become special for inequality. It's the most unequal city in Britain. I think Cambridge has become special for congestion. I think Cambridge has become special for unaffordable housing. I think there's a real problem in this city which is not being addressed. If you read the book, The Spirit Level, which many people will no doubt have done, they talk about what happens in inequality. It's not just a kind of, oh dear, some people are worse off than others. People in Arbery died 10 years younger than those in Newnham. It's not just about that. It's about it corrodes the whole culture. It corrodes democracy, and that's what's happening in Cambridge. And I think we need to address this very seriously, and climate change offers us an opportunity to say, listen, we need to start from ground zero about what makes this a place that people really, really want to live in, not a place that eulogizes about growth or academic achievement or anything else. Thank you.
Mike Sargent, City Councillor. I want to build on what Terry's just said. Actually, he said a lot of the words that I was going to say, but it's interesting that a couple of planning bodies actually have produced work recently in these sort of areas, and I think we've got to take it on board for the local plan. So the Royal Town Partnership Institution has got a paper on poverty and phasing out inequality, and the Town and Country Planning Association has got one on planning out policy and actually thinks it should be a priority for the National Policy Planning Framework. And I think we've got to look at that very seriously, sort of building what Terry's just said about the big challenges we've got. And what we're looking at in terms of developing the local plan is how we get in contact with the people who are not here today, the underrepresented. I'm not asking for a postcode show of hands, but there are so many people who won't be involved in this process unless we work really hard on it. And we look at the people who are, as Terry says, in this category of unequal city. And we've actually got the fifth worst area for social mobility. So I think how do we address those sort of challenges as we develop the local plan and so many other things we're doing in the city.
Thank you, Mike. Right. Is worth thinking.
Thanks very much. Well, I echo what the last two speakers have said. I was thinking that maybe we'd have a new version of, get her name right, of Elizabeth Silver's rule, the 10% rule. Think of all the things that we want to build in Cambridge and divide them by 10, and probably do something else as well. I was thinking that we need radical new structures here. We need the councils to separate themselves from what is effectively a growth lobbying group in Cambridge Ahead. When Cambridge Ahead does not have members who have massive investment in fossil fuels, like the university, like Barclays Bank, then I think they might start to have some credentials as a partner in the flourishing of the people of Cambridge. At the moment, it's an organisation set against the people of Cambridge, and it needs to change, and we need to change the way in which we structure development with those partnerships. We need to change our approach to the economy. No scientist has ever found that it is possible to continue with this growth and decouple from the growth of emissions.
Okay, thank you.
Excuse me, can I suggest maybe the representative of Cambridge Ahead just responds to that?
If we've got time, there's a number of people who want to speak.
Yes, I'm just going to respond to that one. I'm trying to do it, patiently. If you actually have a look at growth rates, Peterborough is growing faster than Cambridge. Milton Keynes is growing faster than Cambridge. Would you hear that sort of talk if you were in Peterborough and Milton Keynes? That's all I want to say.
One thing I was picking up on is that that we can't wait for national government. This has to come from grassroots, and that all of us have a responsibility to do whatever we can to achieve the aims of that climate change, biodiversity and well-being.
To follow up on to keep Cambridge special, we must do something to curb the tourists. I recently, in July, August, was talking to somebody who'd had visitors and they'd just been to Lavenham. How wonderful after that awful Cambridge. Something they must be charged. So those were of older generations. If they are the ones, yes, who bring the economy. At least 50% of the tourists in Cambridge are under 30. I'm quite sure, unless somebody's done a survey, I'm sure they put in nothing.
Sorry, I will get over to the other side of the room and try and do so.
Roman Everything Wildlife Trust, one observation, we're planning for 2050. Almost all those individuals will be dead by 2050. My apologies to the few of you who won't be. I think we should be looking at zero carbon by 2030 rather than 2050. We should be looking at zero water for development as well as zero carbon. And keeping Cambridge special, I hope we'll have an Environment Act in the next year or two which will specify a nature recovery network nationally. I'd like Cambridge to be the place that actually pioneers that, really delivering biodiversity net gain of 20 or 30% rather than 5 or 10%, and linked up so that we're using the nature recovery network to deliver our carbon offset and our biodiversity offset, but also our people-friendly footpaths and cycleways.
One more from here and then I will.
Release Sporting Cambridge Transport. One thing that hasn't been mentioned is land values and land value capture. And I think there needs to be some real focused thought on how we can change the mechanisms by which land value is captured and how we can push some of the obligations back to landowners rather than to developers, so sort of squeezed in the middle in terms of reallocating land for green space, affordable housing, all the other things that we need.
Robin Pilleux, Cambridge PPF Planning Committee. I want to make a more positive and I hope constructive suggestion, which particularly addresses the first two issues about carbon, zero carbon, and about doubling the amount of biodiversity. There are in England, I think, 12 cities which have community forests. Cambridge doesn't. We could, within the green belt, on privately owned land, create a wooded landscape, not thick 100% canopy forest, but open wooded landscape on planting trees in appropriate places, which not only would produce a much more resilient landscape against climate change in terms of biodiversity or species migration and so on, but also would hugely increase the amount of public access to the countryside, and actually the green belt would then become an asset to the citizens of Cambridge rather than purely a negative planning imposition. There are models of how this can be done on privately owned land, particularly the National Forest Company. It's eminently doable if there was a commitment made by the local authorities, both South Cambs County and City, to actually make some form of community forest project actually work for us around Cambridge.
Hello, I'm David Rogers from the other place. What I've been hearing this morning is that you've got a water shortage in Cambridgeshire, and the implication is that it's due to climate change. Of course it is. We're just taking out too much water, their level of development that you've got. I'm very concerned about the proposal for the Oxford-Cambridge Expressways. Getting back to the problem of growth, if you add up your local plans, plus the plans for the Cambridge-Oxford Expressway, your population will increase by 81% by 2050. 81% by 2050. To put that in context, the Office of National Statistics says that the population of England will increase by only 16% in the same period of time. So you're committed to 5 times the national growth rate in your population of Cambridgeshire, which is already suffering a water shortage. Now, Oxford is usually miles behind Cambridge in most respects. In this respect, you're ahead of you, because in Oxfordshire case, our housing stock is projected to double, to more than double by 2050. We've got 280,000 houses across the entire county at the moment, and the Oxcam Expressway plus local council will give us another 300,000 by 2050. These are scales of growth which cannot possibly be supported, not just by the local communities, but by the wildlife, the biodiversity that we're all seeking to protect. So you really need a discussion all across the arc for the scale of growth that your communities can stand. And I would honestly suggest, we've had some hints here about the private sector and decisions behind closed doors. I would suggest that you need a citizens' assembly in Cambridge, and if you don't establish one, Extinction Rebellion will force one on you eventually. A citizens' assembly will allow the citizens of your city to get together with the panels and decide jointly on what is best for Cambridge. And you need this, and we need this at the other end as well. We haven't got one in Oxford either. But your citizens need to feel a buy-in to your local plans. And my feeling is at the moment that none of them does.
I'm a Brigham. I was a road sweeper for 30 years, and really what I want to say is, do we mix up the need for growth with the need for social housing? We need generally affordable housing for the people who keep the city working, like road sweepers, like customers, like the people who work in the shops here. Do we actually need growth? And why is the only way that we can get generally affordable housing pegging it to the amount of housing that is built? I think we need to challenge this sort of add-on at 40 or 30%. And really, we talk about the fact that we need to grow because these are the technologies of the future. I think we need to remember Oxford in the interwar years saw the car industry as the future. The future can be quite limited, and we should remember that. And finally, I just want to ask to remember pedestrians. We hear about cars, we hear about cycles, and actually pedestrian routes are not prioritised. From where I live, I have Coldham's Common on my doorstep. To cross Coldham's Lane to get to it, I'm never going to do. And actually highway engineers do not seem to understand the links, but pedestrians do. They're only focused on car or cycle journeys.
Thank you.
I've hijacked the microphone. Chris Freeman, I'm just a resident close to Ireland. I was very perturbed at the wording of the question about housing. I think it is very dangerous to think about housing needs in terms of this group and that group. What we need in the city is a housing policy which looks at the population as a whole, not just old people, me,
Thank you.
Just picking up on some of the points that Brian Eversham made about wildlife and points made earlier about water. And a lot of you will probably have seen in the press all the concerns that a number of us have been raising across the southeast about the dire straits of the UK's chalk rivers and chalk streets. And I was wondering, the River Cam, you probably know, is in a very bad way. There's increasing evidence across the city about streams and drying up all over the city, and there is a lot of evidence about the over-abstraction of the chalk aquifers. And I was just wondering, would it be nice to signal from this meeting that there is an overall, that we all love the Cam, and that we would like to send out a signal to policymakers that actually this is a very urgent situation, and that people need to act on this, and that we would like to see the Cam at the forefront of policy making, proper landscape strategy, etc.
We have heard Trustee.
Thank you. I'm Rosie Moore. I'm the councillor, Cambridge City Councillor, and my responsibility is climate change, environment and the city centre, which includes tourism. So I just thought I should respond that it would be great to meet you after to catch up on your views. Although I must say we have been working to reduce the number of cars coming into the city, which hasn't been popular, and we haven't found a solution. I'm not sure anyone is ever suggesting that we could sort of build a city wall and stop anyone, including tourists, coming in. We do live in a beautiful city, and that's why people want to come and visit. And visitors are not always tourists. I'm sure all of us as residents also have, for example, friends and family that come and visit, and that's an important part of our city. And I would just say, I've also just come back from a Labour Party conference on your point about 2030, where we voted that the next Labour government will work on a 2030 target, and that Don McDonnell committed when he's Chancellor that as much money as needed to reach that will be available. So.
Antony. Yes. I've got to point the camera that way. Right. If I'm being filmed, splendid. Just want to show some historical examples which I'll have available for you to look at over lunch. 1974-76, the Parry Report. This is Cambridge as he planned it. Cambridge City there and the city equivalent size next door to it. We didn't get this because the City and the County Council panicked and said absolutely not. And this one, which for me is a work of art, is the 1950 map. The proposals from Holford Wright. And again, do have a look at the motorway flyover over Stourbridge Common and the dual carriageway over Christ's Pieces. You can understand why we didn't get that, but that explains why we got Park Street Car Park. My point being is that it's really worth going through the previous local plans to try and get an understanding of why we built the housing developments and the city infrastructure that we did, and learn from some of the mistakes. Thank you.
And to thank Antony as well for video. So, two more comments because I'm overdue now for lunch. So please.
Can I just respond for Jeremy Head? Our starting point in all the work that we did in Sphere was that we didn't actually realise what was happening on the ground. It wasn't that we were advocating it. We actually, the Pauline moment I had was I looked at the technical documents underlying the plan. And right at the back of the technical documents was a forecast prepared by the EEFM, which said employment growth in Cambridge was 0.7% per annum, and that was the figure they were going to use forward to 2025. And that number is simply wrong by a factor of 10. So I've done more work probably than anybody else in terms of digging out what actually is happening, because we can't manage anything unless we know what is happening. And that was the whole point about Sphere, was that we wanted central government to realise what was happening. Because if we didn't have them understanding it, they would not then be able to provide much of the funding that underpins many of the things that are here. So our stance, my stance in doing this work, and I chair the growth group inside Cambridge Head, is actually getting under the numbers. Now it's actually got to the point where we have demanded an internal audit of the numbers produced by the ONS. And they have agreed. So I have a meeting later this month actually to understand why their numbers, which unlike all the planning stuff here, are different from what we're seeing on the ground. There's huge policy implications of that. But one of the opportunities, and Elizabeth, I'm sure you're pleased to hear this, is that on the back of this, they are now recognising that perhaps they don't have proper disability growth response, and that they will look for a pilot region that would actually start to build big data together with their data so that we have much more of this real-time things what's happening. we can make our choices, but if we don't have the data to make the choices on the wrong data, then we'll end up making very bad choices, and that's the work we do.
Just one humble observation. It's been alluded to a number of times over the discussion. I suggest that this forum is perhaps representing quite a narrow slice of the population of Cambridge. And I hope that this is the first of many discussions that the local authority will be taking, and that there'll be plenty of opportunities for lots of different stakeholders to be able to engage with the local plan. Because then when it goes through and becomes policy, hopefully there'll be more buy-in from everyone across the community in the city and the wider county.
Stephen, can you actually just say something about the programme on that? Because there's something going out consultation with councils in November. So what's just...
So yes, if it's helpful, I mean, Lewis, I'm sure will say a few more words about it. Tom's absolutely right. We hear only a number of voices around the discussions around the future. A good plan, picking up on Matthew's points, a number of the points that have been made here, is a plan that is both insightful in terms of the data that it uses, but is actually inclusive in terms of the voices that it hears. The phase that we are at now is we are listening, and we will make no apology for trying to turn up to any event where there are a range of people whose voices we are interested in hearing. We're interested in hearing your voices. We're really interested in hearing the voices of people who find it hard or we find difficult to hear in our processes, particularly younger people, but actually not just younger people, the very old, the people who are excluded, the people who are maybe not comfortable in large forums like this. And over the next period of the plan, so we have a report that was published for a meeting on Monday, which is a councillor advisory group on the issues and options. By the end of November, we will be going through the council processes to produce a document which we then formally start consultation with the communities of South Cambridgeshire and the city for a period of 10 weeks, taking us into February, and recognising that some of you may well be away for some of that time. That process of listening and hearing people's voices should allow us then to provide some analysis that will underpin a new plan. It's going to be a draft plan, and it's probably going to take us the whole of the summer and into the autumn to produce. But in 12 months' time, that's what we hope to be sharing with and talking to you about further. We will check our website, because as we go forwards we will give details of the events and the places where we will be appearing, but we are really keen in being in your spaces, hearing your voices and hearing voices of the people, as Tom rightly says, who are not in this room. With that, Lewis, thank you.
Just a few concluding remarks, and I won't repeat a number of things that have been said. That doesn't mean that they haven't been taken in and listened to. So, I think we started the day, and thanks to Cambridge PPF and all your inputs, because the challenges that we're covering of zero carbon for the future, I mean, that's a huge change in the way that we do development. The commitment that we want to develop in the joint plan with South Cambridgeshire on doubling biodiversity, some may say it's not enough, but just to, a commitment that the CAM is part, and was, I mean, if we're looking at 3 big projects, I kind of introduced it, but I do think it's a discussion about our water courses, and that links into water abstraction. It's a discussion about trees and an urban forest, which is essentially a place for people to enjoy, as well as a major change. We are forced to think about the fact that we will be living in a hotter country in the next 10, 20, 30 years, and that has huge impacts. I mean, that's why some of our silver birch, our beech, our cherries in the city are dying, because they're not the trees that will survive. And so and in terms of the buildings that we've got, and some of the stuff, even the buildings we put up in the last 10 or 20 years, it's too hot to live in it. So we've got those challenges. We've got climate change, net zero carbon, we've got biodiversity in and out of the city, we've got inequality, that basically your challenges again, Terry, and the fact that we've got to meet a whole range of different housing needs, and the people in this room are often sitting in houses which are larger than they need. So we've got all of those challenges, but it does need to then flow into, well, how you, as Stephen said, what do we do as part of the plan? And there's a whole set of issues that we can do, and there's a large set of issues, including the challenges of climate change, which go outside the plan, and we have to address those, because that discussion with the public isn't about, oh, I'm sorry, your point isn't about the local plan. It has to be an inclusive discussion, which then says, your point's important, and this is how we can address it. So the housing strategy that Stephen Hill's talked about is a much more complex strategy, including about the current housing stock and how that gets used. So we're at the start of a process, and we do need to essentially get the input and get that on both the plan and on other issues. Why I think it's not unhelpful to say that Cambridge is special, and I had a lovely quote which I won't read out, but I'll share it, and that's maybe just share it on Twitter and elsewhere, that we have such an amazing inheritance, but there are a number of other things that are special. We do have the knowledge and the commitment that a number of cities are not as fortunate as us to have. Whilst it has been a pressure that many in Cambridge will challenge, and I do think we're going to have a central question: what do you think of the growth so far, and what are your issues with further growth? As a subset, I do think we have to address housing. We still have a challenge, so the idea that we should say no more housing, for me personally, doesn't work, but people will express that view. But so why is Cambridge special? We do have opportunities, but just taking the issue of land value and growth and issues of planning gain, the fact that land is worth a lot in Cambridge and South Cambridgeshire can be turned into a positive. It does mean that in planning we can actually demand far more back, and also make sure that development really does reinvest into things to benefit our residents, but also is captured. At the moment, a lot of value of that land disappears when the landowner has flogged it to the developer. That value, we've got to avoid that value just disappearing, and actually doing some allocation of land for specific purposes, including seeking to reallocate rural land as well as reallocate land within the city, is a route to achieve it. But so I don't rule out the benefit that we've got, the special factor that we can actually capture more value and make sure that that goes back. So it's not a simple set of issues, but as Stephen said, I think we do need to have a few more topic meetings, and if people do want to organise meetings, and often, I mean, this is a far better forum, that I have to say, than if the council organised a meeting. I'm sorry, but we're just not as good at it, and there isn't a middle ground. So I'm very happy to have a meeting about the Oxcam Arc and say that, and along with South Cambs, and say these are the terms that we're in it. In a way, it's fortunate in a sense that we're right at one end, because the development pressures are far bigger in Northamptonshire and in Bedfordshire and in Buckinghamshire, and we are able to aim to get the benefits out of it. We want East-West Rail. We don't want it because all of a sudden we're going to flock to Oxford and they're coming over here. We want it because we need that rail. We need the non-road connectivity. We don't want a full-on expressway. It is a benefit to us that we improve the links between Caxton Gibbet and the Black Cat roundabout, but we do not want an expressway. We do not need to have. It is not about a corridor of massive fundamental growth. It's a corridor of places that need to reshape, and there will be an argument about how that is done. So we're in it for what we can get out. We're in it because we cannot get things in this country unless government listens, and government doesn't listen at all at the moment, but it doesn't listen very well normally. So we need to use the fact that Cambridge quite uniquely has more influence in government than many places. That's not fair on Barrow-in-Furness, it's not fair on rural England, but we have to use it to make our community successful. So we will take away a lot, and there's a lot of issues being raised, and this is just the start of the process. But the issues and options report and the dialogue, looking at the draft now that you see, it is going to be quite different in terms of a lot of its key messages by November, but look at it, do engage with your councillors, do engage by responding in that November-January period, and let's have more of these discussions. They do capture ideas, they do build a community consensus, and we have to be inspirational and have ambition. And we had a lot of that this morning, so thank you.